So one of my goals with having us in these smaller groups like this is just to help increase discussion. So that way we have multiple discussions going on and not just like one large discussion. I know when you have a group of like 30 or 40, that can cause some people, not to want to share out just because speaking out in such a large group can be intimidating, or it can make you want to like stay quiet so that way others get the opportunity to speak. I also want to try something new that might help us, just create more discussion and, getting to know each other on a different level here through Sunday school. So while Sunday school is, much more content-based than some other ministries in the church and that kind of thing, want to add just a bit of, like a fellowship aspect to it. And so starting with just some simple questions like this, that's the goal there. Get us talking just about ourselves. But to introduce kind of the class as a whole. So if you look on your tables, you should have two handouts. One that is like a half sheet that has an outline of Genesis as well as an outline for this class as a whole. So the class being titled, Who Are You? And then there's a whole sheet of paper titled Be Fruitful and Multiply. So the Be Fruitful and Multiply is for today. The half sheet is kind of like for the whole class. And so this class is going to heavily be based on Genesis, but we've outlined how we're going to tackle that below. And with that said, it's not going through all 50 chapters of Genesis. My guess is it's going to be heavily, there's going to be a heavy emphasis on the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Because what we're trying to tackle here is identity. Asking the question, who are we according to God's Word? And so if you look at the world today, people are lost, right? In a number of ways. But one is people are lost and they don't even know, they don't have kind of like that North Star or a true north, right? People are looking for happiness and they're looking in all the wrong places, right? They're trying to find purpose in life and they're not finding it. And it's because they're not looking for purpose in the way that God designed us to do that, right? And so when Stephen talked with me about doing this class, that's kind of what stuck out to me and what made me interested in being able to spend some time studying these kind of topics, because it is something that kind of resonates with me, thinking through when I was getting, more serious into my faith and that kind of thing. We all want to be happy. I know that. That's just kind of like human nature, right? But there's that popular C.S. Lewis quote from like The Weight of Glory. It's like people are looking around for happiness and it's like they're playing with mud pies in a slum when they're offered, like a vacation at the seashore, right? And I see that very clearly in the world today, right? People are looking for happiness and they're not finding it. Or when they kind of find it, it's just this lower level happiness and they're missing out on more, right? And that's not prosperity gospel, right? It's not saying that Christians are going to be, rich and healthy and only good things are going to happen to us. But when we're properly oriented, as God created us to be, we can kind of face life in a way that unbelievers can't, right? And so that's what we're going to be looking at as we study through Genesis. And so that's why I say a heavy portion of it is going to be on the first 3 chapters of Genesis, which has to do with the creation of the world, the creation of Adam and Eve, the fall, which impacts everything in the world today, and then so on. So we might touch on some other topics there, other portions of Genesis as the class goes on or into individual classes. But we're going to be looking heavily at those things. As a group, y'all discuss what was life like in the Garden of Eden, right? God created the world. He created a special place within that world, the Garden of Eden. He placed Adam and Eve there. What was life like for them? I'll give you guys about another 5 minutes or so to talk about that as a group. So what was life like? Let me get one group just to share one thing. We'll start over here. I'm going to get everybody to share at least one thing. Can y'all share one thing? Lots of right answers.
Well, one thing that I thought of was actually getting to talk to God. You know, I mean, that would top the list. You know, that would be over the top.
That would be. So I'll put talk/walk with God. I feel like that would be coming like next or somewhere down the road, right? So that's different, right? All right. What about you guys? You got something? One additional thing?
Oh, we talked about a lot of things.
Right.
One of the things I brought up was that they had a job.
Job, work.
And things they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it almost sounds wrong at first, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Did you try to say, yeah. Well, now, so we will have work, which is going to be not next week. Normally, you know, it's the class that follows this one, but Scott's jumping in the middle there. But yeah, work. What would y'all have to add?
God supplied the food.
Food. How much food?
All of it.
All of it, right? And it's funny, you know, like I think in Genesis 2 it says like God gave them, you know, fruit from all the trees to eat, you know, and then I think just like human nature, I'm like, whoa, there's one that's, you can't, right? It's like we want to focus on that one instead of like they could eat fruit from any of the trees in the garden. Except for
Isn't
one,
that
right?
kind of human nature? That one thing you're told you cannot do, suddenly, even if you didn't want to do it before, that's what you want to do.
I think so, right? Like, yeah.
We're kind of wired that way. You're kids.
Right.
Don't touch that.
I feel that. Feel that a lot. All right. Can y'all add one more to that?
We talked about like liking fruits and veggies.
Oh.
Like it was pleasurable.
I am curious about that, just as like a meat lover, like when you know, what was that like? I have a feeling they may have tasted different. I don't know. All right, can y'all add one more?
Good question. Everything we put is on the board.
That's a pretty good list, right?
Oh, there was no laundry.
No laundry. That's a huge plus. Now, when I was walking around, Tim was talking about something, though, at y'all's group that's not up there. Yeah.
Well, we were talking mosquitoes and all those things, but
Yeah,
the other thing I pointed out is that it wasn't heaven. I think we equate the Garden of Eden with heaven, but God knew that they weren't equal. That wasn't ever His plan. So I guess that was one thing.
Okay. So yeah, not heaven. We're going to talk about that, but the animals aspect, y'all were talking about that. So, you know, we said there wasn't mosquitoes, or mosquitoes weren't like they weren't the same today, right? So there were animals in the garden, which, you know, I think adds to a certain level of like niceness, or, you know, makes it more enjoyable, right? But you didn't have to deal with the negative aspects of animals, such as mosquitoes.
Right? Or fearing for your life.
Or fearing for your life, right? So yeah, so Adam, in the garden, Adam and Eve, they were able to talk or walk with God. They did have work, but work must have not been toilsome or painful or frustrating like it can be today. They had plenty of food to eat. And apparently, you know, the food was good. I mean, God said it was good. I think, did I call on y'all? Did I leave y'all out? I'm so sorry. What would you add to this list right here?
He said peace and harmony.
Peace and harmony. All right. And then you also, I heard one of y'all say it was good, right? Yeah. Which is kind of obvious, but who said it was good? God. So if God says it was good, it must have been really good, right? And then you said peace and harmony as well. Anybody know like a fancy word for peace and harmony? I just kind of like this one. Starts with do what? Utopia. Start thinking what shalom starts with. So in the garden, there was shalom, right? So Adam and Eve, and so when we think of shalom, right, we think of most like simple definitions would be like peace, right? But sometimes with peace, we get this idea that with peace, there's just like absence of conflict, right? Like, we're at peace with Russia or something, right? Like we're not in a war with them. But shalom's deeper than that, right? It means perfect harmony. So in the garden, Adam and Eve were at peace with God. Not just like there's no conflict, but they walked in harmony with God. They also did the same with each other, right? There was no bickering, no fighting, no, it's hard to gossip when there's just two of you, right? But there's no, but between human beings, right? That there was peace and harmony, right? There was no beef with each other, right? Things were good. There was harmony with the animals, right? It doesn't mention mosquitoes biting them. Harmony with the world. There's not things like floods and landslides and that kind of thing going on. So in the garden, everything was good. Not as good as heaven, but it was good, right? And God created Adam and Eve. He placed them there. And things went well. Well, I say they went well for at least some time. Not really sure how long. But for at least the next little bit, let's live in Genesis 1 and 2, right? Things are good, right? And then it says this. So if the top of your handout for today on Be Fruitful and Multiply, it says this. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So, what does that mean, being created in God's image? Scott Bennett's going to tell you exactly what that means next week, right? Just exactly, like no controversy. I'm going to give you just like, just settle every little aspect of what it could mean to be made in the image of God next week. So be sure you come back for that. And then after God created them in his image, it says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Now after it says, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And we will talk about that part 2 weeks from now when we talk about work. But today we're just going to be focusing on being fruitful and multiplying. And so on this next one, we have 2 separate questions I'm going to have you guys talk about in a group right now. All right, so 2 separate questions. It's the next 2 that are on the handout. And the first one is, what was God's goal with the command, be fruitful and multiply? And the second one is, what did it look like for Adam and Eve to obey that command in the Garden of Eden? Right? Before the fall happens, just living in Genesis 1 and 2. What was God's goal with the command, be fruitful and multiply? And what did it look like for Adam and Eve to obey this command? All right, well, let's come back together. This group over here said they've got the perfect answer, so we'll let them share out. Yeah, y'all want to hear it? All right, so let's just stay with the first question first, right? Or the what was God's goal with the command, be fruitful and multiply? Like, what was God wanting to see here, right? What was he trying to get them to do? What's the perfect answer?
I think they were using their lives for a purpose. So a lot, most of the application for be fruitful and multiply is for having children and populating the earth, right? I think they were using their lives in many ways to like they weren't just sitting there and eating and not doing anything. God told them be fruitful could mean many things, I think. But maybe not. You're the theologian.
Oh, I don't know about that. That's why, look, you notice everybody else, right? Like they get up and they teach from the front. I'm trying to lean on you guys, right? I don't have all the answers. I'm really just asking all the questions that I would like to know. So,
Yeah, the
Okay.
work in the garden was fruitful as well.
okay. So the work was
Not
fruitful
just
as well.
having children, yeah.
Okay. Any other groups have a perfect answer? They want to share their perfect answer?
Yeah, fruitful is not just making babies, but being productive.
Okay. Speaking fruit. What about multiply?
Well, we
Well,
did.
that's-
that's.
Well, you know, like I said, it's not just making babies. Making babies is just one aspect of it there.
Okay.
Is to be productive, working.
Okay. So being productive and work. What was God's goal with? Let's focus a bit on just the having babies part. What was His goal in that? Anybody got any ideas? You might have to pull from some different things other than just
More people to glorify Him.
glorify God. Yeah. Okay. Anybody got anything to add on to that? Yeah, I mean. Well, I want to.
Say it again, buddy.
I missed it.
Well, I just confirmed what Carolyn said. To glorify God, primary goal of creating more humans.
More humans. Okay. So glorify God by creating more creating more humans. Oh, all right. There's a lot of good things that were just said.
But
So more.
also the things that people create boy, this is going to be a tongue twister. The things that we create, not babies, like say an artist or a farmer, the things we make also glorify God.
Right.
We do all things to the glory of God.
Mm-hmm. Now, so some of it, we're jumping into the work portion of it, and I think that's part of it, right? That's good though, right? But there's just so much here. Like I really think Genesis 1 through 3 is like some of the densest chapters of the Bible. Like there's so many things we can pull from there, and that's why when we created this class, the outline, that it's more thematic than verse by verse, because like I said, it's dense. So we said more humans, and then I heard somebody say more image bearers. Who said image bearers? Somebody over here. Okay. So more image bearers. More worshipers. Y'all like the 1P or the 2P spelling of worshipers? 1P's American, right? That's the way it's supposed. Okay.
One thing that we absolutely do not know is that what does be fruitful and multiply actually mean? Because God had to have given Adam and Eve knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that knowledge actually? Because when you think about it, brass and all the artistic and mechanical and whatever things developed, over the years. So there had to be a, knowledge there to begin with that He gave to them. How is that actually warped in the fall? So be fruitful and multiply may have had a whole lot more intent than we can actually know. But, like was said, not only people, but also enlarging of the garden itself, planting more trees, growing more stuff outside of Eden proper itself.
Sure. Yeah, and I would say, I think that is definite, right? There's this aspect, I think, where God had commanded them to create culture, whether that's with gardens or using the stones and different things that He had given them. Like I said, we're going to be talking a lot about that next week, or 2 weeks from now. But today I'd like to just focus on the missional aspect of it, right? So when God created them and told them to be fruitful and multiply, if we're thinking about just Adam and Eve, if they were to taken that themselves, right, and had children and populated the earth would have glorified God by creating more image bearers and more worshipers that were filling the globe. So while there's a cultural aspect of it, as well as a missional aspect of it, and that might not be the best wording, but we see throughout Scripture this kind of similar language that follows. So after the flood, God tells Noah and his sons to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth, right? When God calls Abraham, he tells him he's going to make him into a great nation, right? Which implies like lots of people. After Abraham, we see things like with Joseph, right? Now, sometimes if you just Google or search for "be fruitful and multiply" in like an online Bible, or if you search like that way, sometimes it's people saying it, sometimes it's God saying it. But there's all these different aspects of "be fruitful and multiply" where the focus, at least part of it, is on people, right? Now, there's always going to be that cultural aspect as well, trying to make sure I'm not jumping ahead at all. But as you kind of follow through the story of the Bible, there's this shift that happens, all right? And so let's move into the next question that says, how did the fall change what obedience to this command looks like, right? Because in the garden, if they were going to multiply people, it looked like having children. But then chapter 3 happens, so we're leaving the shalom, we're leaving the garden here, right? The fall happens, and the fall, I think it was like Gary just said, like it impacted the world in ways that we probably don't even know, right? The Bible speaks of the fall as, fracturing every part of creation. Paul writes that, the whole earth is groaning, because of the fall. It's not just human beings that were impacted, but the whole earth. And so how did the fall impact or change what obedience to this command looks like? All right, so I'm going to have a lot of groups share out, and I'm hesitant to even try to write because it's kind of hard to listen and keep up myself there. And with this question, I think there's a lot of different things we can say. But before we begin, just to be clear, so the question is, how did the fall change obedience to the command, be fruitful and multiply, right? Like if we list the ways the fall just changed the world, we'd be writing a massive book, right? Even with this, we could be writing a pretty massive book as well. But God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. I believe that command goes to us as well. But things have changed, right? Since the fall, things have changed. So what are some ways that the fall changed what obedience to the command, be fruitful and multiply, looks like?
It became harder to work.
Harder to work?
Had to actually go out and toil the land.
Right.
They were in the garden, everything came up on its own. There were no thorns, no weeds.
Right.
We had to go out and work the ground to get anything to grow.
Right. So actually getting food became harder, which, without food, it's hard to, sustain a population, right? So work became significantly harder.
Women had birth pains after that.
Pain in childbirth. Yeah, that definitely had to decrease, they didn't really have any, I guess they had no children with pains in without pains in childbirth that we know about, right? So all sorts of questions like that in Genesis. But I'm guessing, the pain in childbirth definitely reduced the stoke for multiplying for women, I'm guessing, right?
Well, the pain in childbirth goes beyond just having the baby. The mother's connection with the child goes until death.
Right.
So you watch and you often hear mom say, "I feel your pain."
Mm-hmm.
The mom stays up all night worrying about her kids. Husband's sleeping. You guys love your kids too, but pain in childbirth, you feel things at a different level with your kids.
Right. I never thought about that, but yeah. So if you had 50 of them running around there, you're concerned about, a handful's enough.
You also have death, and you have death in childbirth, which is a whole different layer.
Yeah.
It affects not only the mother, obviously, but also the whole family unit.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Death and childbirth.
In a sense, they're creating their own mission field because these people are not, born walking with God. They're born with a sin nature. So now we have unbelievers, at least until they become believers.
Right.
So in the garden, they'd have been birthed, they'd have been walking with God, they'd have been able to talk with God. Different world than today, right? Huh. Let's see, what group, have y'all shared out yet on this one? I don't think so. Y'all have a response to that? How has it changed?
We can no longer talk to him directly.
No longer talk to God directly? Okay.
So we were unguided.
Unguided in that aspect?
Removed our innocence and protection.
So now just multiplying children does not multiply followers or worshipers. Okay. Do y'all have anything to add?
Well, I think that's the big part of Be Fruitful Multiply is the implied, yes, you're having children, but then to disciple them and raise them in the knowledge of the Lord, which is in Deuteronomy, the same written to the same people this like to train your children the way they should go. And Adam and Eve had mixed results because their first two named children, one was doing all right and one was a murderer.
Right.
Got bad pretty quick, and then the rest of the Bible is tracing those two lines: the seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman, or at least the rest of Genesis.
Right.
So it's interesting.
Also, just we're beginning to see God's grace in the promise that a child will crush Satan's head. Just what hope we have in that mission of being fruitful and multiplying is actually going to cause some redemption.
Lots of good answers there. So
one of the main things that actually happened was our focus changed. Our focus changed from God to ourselves. So the obedience became harder to actually do because you were thinking about yourself more than you were thinking about, obeying. So the obedience part of it became horribly hard, in a lot of ways.
And that's good. And you start seeing especially into the New Testament, this theme or this command, like being fruitful and multiplying, filling the earth with worshipers. With Adam and Eve in the garden, you can think almost just like bearing children. They're going to be in the garden with God, walking, talking with God. It's like, having children is like synonymous with creating more worshipers. And then you get to the New Testament, and it's kind of the same emphasis, but it's with disciple making, and that's why in the handout I included the Great Commission there in Matthew 28, and then a passage from Acts 1, right? Like there's this aspect or this emphasis on filling the earth with worshipers of God. That's something that God cares deeply about. And it almost seems like paradoxical, but even then Paul praises singleness and the effect that can have on multiplying, right? And it's almost like if you could think back to Adam and Eve in the garden, it's like, would you ever see this coming, right? With the command to multiply. You're ever going to see that there would be a day when you could multiply without physically multiplying, right? But you follow this trajectory through Scripture, and that's the kind of thing you start seeing, right? It starts out with being fruitful and multiply. God telling Abraham He's going to make him into a great nation with children, like the seashore. When Israel is in captivity, God still tells him, He says, "Be fruitful and multiply." Kind of the aspect of growing in numbers. Now with the work part, He also tells them to plant vineyards and build houses and that kind of thing, and to be a blessing to the nation that they're in. Again, we'll talk about work 2 weeks from now. But this aspect of multiplying believers or followers of God is throughout the Bible, but the emphasis starts shifting. It's kind of, for me, like a beautiful shift. It's almost kind of like the shift that happens with sacrifice and circumcision in the Old Testament shifting to baptism and the Lord's Supper in the New Testament. You kind of see it. It's the same emphasis, same language, but it's different. There's been a change that is made. So next question, looks like we're getting close on time. But the next question is, what could obedience look like this? What could obedience to this command look like today? All right, and I say could because at first I had what are some ways you're obeying this command, right? But then I want to leave it more open-ended, right? Like, what are some ways people could obey this command? Because I think there's lots of different ways we could obey this command. And maybe individually we're not called to obey this command in all the same ways, right? We're all called to obey the command, but the way we go about doing it could look different depending on who we are, what God has called us individually to, and that kind of thing. So as a group, share, so what are some different ways you could obey this command today of multiplying worshipers of God? All right, let's come back together. I think this might be the last question we do as a group. So let's, like I said before, obedience to this command, I believe that's something we are all called to, right? We're all called to obey the command, but the way we obey it, or the individual emphasis that we partake in obeying this command might look a little bit different. Anybody have just some ways we could obey this command?
Bible studies.
Bible studies, okay. Missions. In a lot of ways, you can just think about the ministries that happen here at HPC, right?
Have children.
You could just have children, right?
Adopt children.
Adopt children.
Support adoption.
Support adoption. Great answers, right? Now, is it just having children, or what do we got to add to that, Stephen?
Well, if you're going to have children, you need to disciple them.
All right.
You need to teach them the way they should go. And not everyone's called to that.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone is called to participate in making disciples of all nations.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a team to do that. Whether you're the missionary, some here are supporting and praying. But even in our own community, in our own church, how are we participating in the overall discipleship of one another and the people in this community too?
So have children, adopt children. We can have Bible studies here at church. We can support adoption. We also have, we support choices here at HPC. I think that is something that, goes along with obeying the command to be fruitful and multiply, right? There always has to be that aspect of disciple making that comes underneath all of that now, though, right? Because people just aren't born with this natural inclination to worship God.
One thing you're familiar with, Bible in the schools. That's another aspect of being a missionary, if you will. We talked about that. A missionary can be what you're called to, whether you're all the way from a mom to a missionary, and everything in between.
Right.
Supporting, praying, whatever, going. Your mission field's wherever God calls you to be.
Wherever you're at, yeah. Anything else to add here?
In the Old Testament, it said, be fruitful, multiply. In the New Testament, it says, go out and preach the gospel. It's evangelism.
Right.
Flip side of it. Same thing, same coin, but it's a different, the other side of it.
Right, yeah. So it's going from Old Testament in the garden, being fruitful and multiplying, having children. New Testament now, preaching the gospel, making disciples. Same thing, right? Two sides of the same coin. Yeah. All right, and we are coming up on the end. So the last question that we would have talked about is, because one of the goals with this class is to not only share what the Bible has to say about our identity, but to also compare that to what the world at large has to say about that as well, right? The Bible, speaks a lot about like light shining in the darkness, right? And our beliefs stick out all the more, or you can see them more clearly, the beauty of them, when you compare them to just the darkness of the world. And so the last one, you guys could have answered this, better than I can. But the world today, if this message were to go out to them, they would have a lot of negative things to say about that, right? You hear all sorts of things with, the generation now that's coming, the marriage rates are low, right? Like marriage isn't something that's valued. People look at children now, more than ever, from what I understand, like as a burden, right? Something that is going to like take life from you, keep you from enjoying life, and that kind of thing. The world today would say a command, like you should be able to live your life however you want, right? Like to say that there's a command from God that should govern the way you live, the world would scoff at that. Especially with the idea of saying like you should go out and make disciples. The world is very negative towards evangelism, right? It's more just live and let live. If they believe that, it's wrong to try to change their mind, kind of thing. But the world is the opposite, right? It's dark. And so when one of the goals, and so hopefully, next time we'll be able to spend more time kind of comparing the two with the light and darkness kind of aspect. But this command here, the world would not look at that and say, yeah, we agree with that. That sounds good. That's something we should all be doing. They'd be much more negative. All right, and then I want to apologize too. I realized, halfway through, I didn't pray to begin the class. We kind of had a rolling start into it and kept going. But I will pray to close us, and then we can head out to the sanctuary or to get our kids or, whatever comes next. So let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this church, God, that we have to gather together with and to worship you. Thank you for HPC and for all the ways that we work together to obey your commands, including this command here, God, to be fruitful and multiply. Thank you for the ministries of our church that help us support each other and support the world. And God, I pray that you would continue to bless us here. And I pray that the things that we do would be glorifying to you, God. In your name I pray, amen.